the Rebel Capitalist Show.
Let's go back to China here momentarily, because you guys talk about a topic regarding China that I never have heard anybody talk about before. And I've actually adopted it. Whenever I talk about it, I try to give you guys credit. And it's this concept that when Deng Xiaoping took over in China in 1976, he looked around, and I got this from Warner. He looked around and saw what was happening in Germany and in Japan and said, okay, we want to move forward with capitalism because we don't want to replicate the Russian experience. Then we need to create some smaller banks. So he does that, creates community banks, and therefore you have this, we'll call it a capitalist revolution, for lack of a better word, in China. But then he sees Russia collapse in 1991, and he says, okay, well, that's our buddy, that's our trading partner. We were kind of replicating their economic model, or they were replicating ours. And if it collapsed, I need to know why. So he sent some economists into Russia to figure out what went wrong. Their conclusion was not that communists or communism failed. It's that they had implemented communism prior to allowing capitalism to run its course. And therefore, the Chinese need to continue to allow capitalism to run its course. And I think, and I don't want to put words in Jeff's mouth, but I think he would, or his conclusion is that Xi Jinping now sees China as in this phase of late stage capitalism, where the socialists or the revolutionaries have to come in and take over the means of production in order to move society forward. Because if they don't, then the capitalists are just going to feed on one another, and they're going to bring the whole system down, and they're going to reverse course and go back to a standard of living that was equivalent to something like feudalism, if the capitalists have their way. So they need to
rob the country.
Yeah. So that's the message that I got from listening to so many of your guys' interviews. I think it's fascinating, and nobody is talking about this. So can you shed some light on that?
Maybe no one's talking about it because they're not reading their Karl Marx anymore. Come on, what are you guys reading out there? You're not reading the Communist Manifesto? Come on. But it comes from Marx. Specifically, he said, what we need to do, we can't go straight to communism where money and wealth is redistributed, enough money, and so as to maintain conditions. Because we're in a serfdom right now, we're a peasantry. What we need to do is do what the capitalists do fabulously. Take money, put it to work, create things. George Gammon, entrepreneur, create wealth that didn't exist before. Put people to work, create new goods. And then for some reason, this is the part I don't understand. He believed that eventually this runs out. Like human ingenuity stops. Like there's a limit to it, a limit to how high humanity can reach, you know? And that part just doesn't sit well with me. But here's the disturbing part. Guess what? Capitalism does end up in cul-de-sacs, depressions, global depressions. And he wrote it in 1848, the Communist Manifesto, which was the year after a surge of revolutions had swept across Europe and created socio-economic chaos. So you could see it then. And then, of course, we had the long depression in the 19th century, capitalism failed. The Great Depression in the 20th century, capitalism failed. That's when socialism took off, right? Maybe this is it. It makes sense. And here we are again in the silent depression, as I like to call it, since 2007. Capitalism certainly has failed. It's reached a cul-de-sac. And the people that believe that
this is in the eyes of the Marxist. I want to be clear.
Well, I think capitalism has failed as well. We've reached a cul-de-sac. Now we need to back out and go in another direction. I don't say throw the baby out with the bathwater and give up on capitalism, but the Marxists say, look, this happened. It's over. We're not generating any more wealth for the last 14 years. It's all financialization going to the uber wealthy. And it looks like it makes sense. The economy has stagnated. It's the worst 14 years that we've experienced since the Great Depression. I maintain it was actually worse than in year 14 of the Great Depression. And so in China, that's exactly what happened. They pursued a model that Michael Pettis, the China expert, often calls the Alexander Gershonkin model. I mispronounced it, but basically it's a model, a growth model that many, many, many countries have pursued, which is to do exactly what you said, is increase the pool of savings, use it to subsidize exports, manufacturing, grow the economy, and then eventually you get to a point where it stops working. That model always stops working. And it coincided with another worldwide depression, the silent depression. And so Xi Jinping, good Marxist that he is, good Chinese communist characteristics, he says, yeah, it's time to stop the belief that we can continue growing as we did before 2007. It's time to accept a slower pace of growth and to redistribute power, just as it was predicted, that end stage capitalism is here.
So you think that's what he's doing with his more authoritarian approach to public or private companies, like in the tech sector, and then maybe even his approach with Evergrande? I mean, it looks like he's being more capitalist, allowing Schumpeter's creative destruction to take hold and just allowing them to fail, something I think we should have done here in the United States if we had true capitalism back during the GFC. But so a lot of people look at that and say, oh my gosh, he's being more capitalist than the United States. But maybe in reality, his true motive is that he's not trying to move more towards capitalism. He's trying to move more towards this socialist workers' utopia by showing the capitalists that he is in charge, and the government is going to start having more control and potentially even taking over the means of production.
I would be very surprised if he let Evergrande go, if Evergrande was one of the inner circle, right? No,
Right.
I am assuming that this is an alternative power center to Beijing, to his power source, and that's why he's letting it go. That's what I would expect. He doesn't seem like someone. No, all his announcements, the 19th Party Congress at the end of 2017, it's all been repeating the notion that we're not going to reach that fantastic goal of a prosperous society. No, it's a moderately prosperous society, and we're de-emphasizing the prosperity and we're emphasizing common prosperity. So definitely he's not pursuing capitalism. He's pursuing power politics, and he knows what a precarious situation China is, both internally and externally. This is no time to have alternative power sources inside the walls when you're confronting what may be a second Cold War. We just had that Quad meeting with the 4 Pacific powers and the agreement between the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom. The world looks tough for China on the outside. It looks tough on the inside, and you can't have alternative power sources on the inside. You've got to have one emperor leading the way. What's going to be a very difficult adjustment period. Earlier, I mentioned that model. The way the model ends is you either go through quite a long period of digesting all the inefficiencies, let's call it a lost decade or so, or you go through a financial crisis, a destabilizing, rapid rebalancing of all the imbalances inside. And I would assume that's not what they want. So they want to have a slow grind, a little bit like what we saw in Brazil in the 80s and the Japanese right now.
What you're talking about as far as this decline in economic output, or in essence, the standard of living in China, it's a whole different ballgame there when you are dealing with social unrest with 1 billion people compared to, let's say, Australia right now with 25 million. You've got the same or similar sized government trying to manage 1 billion people, and that gets ugly, or that could get ugly very quickly. And when I look at global macro, I say, okay, if that's the direction they're potentially going, that means that they are going to be producing fewer goods, and they're going to be importing fewer goods. I did a research for a whiteboard video last week where I read they import about $2 trillion worth of goods annually, We just think of them as a huge exporter, but they import a lot as well because of the size of their economy. And assuming that 50% of those transactions are settled in dollars, well, if their imports go down by half because you have this decline in an economic superpower because they're being taken over by a communist regime, and although they think that may lead to a socialist utopia, we all know where that leads. And that leads into this nightmare totalitarian police state, which is very inefficient at producing goods and services. Look at North Korea as an example. And therefore they're importing a lot less, therefore they're exporting a lot fewer dollars. And what does that do to the Eurodollar system? What does that do to global liquidity if that puts the squeeze on global dollar cash flows and their ability to pay back that debt? If those debts default, it's true that money doesn't get destroyed, but it reduces the balance sheet capacity for those banks in the Eurodollar system to provide liquidity to all those global corporations that need it to survive. And to me, that leads to one place, and that's a global Lehman Brothers moment. I don't know.
Yes, all of what you said, agreed. Here's an interesting little fact. During the Deng Xiaoping and etc. expansion, what we saw is foreign capital coming into China in the form of foreign direct investment, meaning you're buying the controlling interest of a company and you're investing in things that can't be moved very easily: plant, property, equipment, employees, real stuff. We have seen since 2014 that switch, and it is now dominated by portfolio inflows. That's what's dominating China. And I bring this up because we saw this in the Asian financial crisis. Same thing, the Southeast Asian and the four Asian, the tigers. Right. We saw FDI at first, and then portfolio flows. And you know how portfolio flows, hot money flows are, how skittish they are. They're a coward. Capital is a coward. And we've seen some things out of China that are not reassuring, let's say. If these portfolio flows start leaving China, it would be destabilizing, quite destabilizing, because now they're the dominant inflow for a country that's desperate for dollars. And so what's going to happen? It's unsettling. They may put down the gates. They may not let those flows leave. To your larger point, the future is not one where China is leading and growing economically and vigorously. And that's going to have a negative effect on the economy, for sure, global economy.